Hello and welcome to another English lesson. Today, students, I would like to begin our class by singing the national anthem for you. Now, you must think we do that every day in the beginning of the school, but at that time you just hear it and maybe even sing along. But today, I want you all to pay complete attention and listen to it and understand it. I will also be adding the English translation of our national anthem so you can have a better understanding. Alright? So I request all of you to kindly rise for the anthem and at the same time pay attention to the screen.
जनगण मन अधिनायक जय हे भारत भाग्य विधाता पंजाब सिंध गुजरात मराठा द्राविड उत्कल बंगा विंध्य हिमाचल यमुना गंगा उच्चल जलधि तरंगा तव शुभ नामे जागे तव शुभ आशीष मांगे गाहे तव जय गाथा जनगण मंगलदायक जय हे भारत भाग्य विधाता जय हे जय हे जय हे जय 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 हे.
So, students, what do you notice? Is it just a song with good music and nice words? Apart from that, children, you also must have noticed that it is a prayer. And we all know the composer of our national anthem, right? It is none other than Rabindranath Tagore. Do you know, children, very similarly, Rabindranath Tagore wrote a beautiful poem. Today, therefore, students, we shall study the poem Where the Mind is Without Fear by Rabindranath Tagore. I want all of you to pay attention when I read it, alright? Where the Mind is Without Fear by Rabindranath Tagore. Where the mind is without fear and the head is held high, where knowledge is free, where the world has not been broken up into fragments by narrow domestic walls, where words come out from the depth of truth, where tireless striving stretches its arms towards perfection, where the clear stream of reason has not lost its way into the dreary desert sand of dead habit, where the mind is led forward by thee into ever-widening thought and action, into that heaven of freedom, my Father, let my country awake. Alright, students, now that we have read that poem, I want you all to answer these quick questions. How is the mind described by Tagore? Yes, the mind is without fear. Second question, where do the words come out of? They come out of the depth of truth. And the last question, by whom is the mind led forward? By thee, that is by God. Very good, students. Now before we move ahead, we should know who this great persona was, right? So Rabindranath Tagore was a brilliant poet, a writer, a painter and even a philosopher who was born in May 1861, that is during the British Raj. He is the author of Gitanjali, which is known to be a profoundly sensitive verse. And the poem that we will be studying is also a part of this work. Alright, students, now that we know about the poet and the times he was born in, we understand that he must have seen India's struggle for freedom, right? He writes this poem as a prayer to the Lord, wherein he expresses his wish of how the India of his dream looks like. Yes? So, students, you must have studied in your history lessons about the oppression faced by Indians during the British Raj. The farmers, the artisans, even the army, and all the locals faced a lot of economic and cultural exploitation under the British rule. Let's watch a very short video to have a better understanding.
In reality, the Raj was just a more official system of wealth extraction and racial oppression that had been going on for over a century. British advisors had final say over the independent principalities, and participation in the Indian civil service was limited to candidates who could take an entrance exam in London. Tells you a little bit about who they wanted running the place. And this contributed to a revealing double standard of how Britain and India viewed the empire, or, Britain and anyone else for that matter. In London, you'd see the fruits of humanistic multiculturalism in food, art, demographics, and mind-numbing economic power. But back in India, it just looked like some domineering colonizers came to take the shiny stuff and stomp on the rest to satisfy a racist power trip. Naturally, this led leading Indian politicians and thinkers to consider the potential joys of not being oppressed, and in 1885, the Indian National Congress pushed to give Indians a greater voice in their own government, but Britain's counteroffer was that they would get nothing and like it, a shockingly effective negotiating tactic thus far. Now, at this point, it seemed like there was no way this finely tuned system of colonial exploitation could possibly come undone, but we've got to remember that this whole enterprise was a cash grab, so if India ever stopped being profitable, why keep it? And nothing will sink a profit margin faster than a good old-fashioned world war, better yet, two of them. When war struck in 1914, the Raj supported the Entente against the Central Powers with supplies and soldiers. This got a little awkward when Indians heard the British propaganda calling World War I a fight for democracy, as they could be forgiven for not realizing that Britain was into that. So it became harder to reinforce the post-war same old after India sacrificed so much for Britain's war. In World War II, Deutschland Boogaloo, India provided 2.5 million soldiers, loaned some £10 million sterling to the British government, and provided critical supplies at tremendous cost to India itself.
Memories from all the history lessons refreshed, right? So, students, through the first 5 lines of the poem, what do you notice? Yes, Rabindranath Tagore prays for an India where the mind is without fear and the head is held high, meaning he prayed for Indians to live freely and with dignity. He prayed for Indians to come out of the exploitative acts of the British, and he wished for a country where knowledge is freely accessible to everyone, where the world has not been broken up into fragments. What do you think is implied with this line, children? This means that Tagore didn't want any kind of boundaries between nations and within our nation, because these were imaginary and man-made boundaries, implying that God did not create them. The entire world is one family. Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, a Sanskrit saying from the Upanishads, which means the world is one family. Tagore says that he prays for the world that has not been broken up into fragments, meaning small pieces, by narrow domestic walls. What does this mean, children? We know what narrow-mindedness is, right? Similarly, Tagore wished for a world which is not fragmented because of narrow domestic walls or barriers on the basis of caste, class, religion, and color between societies. Children, we notice that even today we face communal tension in India. There are riots, one religion is thought to be better than the other, temples and mosques are demolished in the name of God, and people are treated differently on the basis of where they were born, in which community, in which caste. Do you think that this is what Tagore prayed for? Is this how you want your motherland to continue to be? So students, what do you think you can do to remove these social barriers that stand strong even today in the minds of Indians?
We live in a society with different cultures, religions, traditions, So the change should start from you. If you witness an act of discrimination happening even at a very small level, we should be the ones to stop it and make people aware of the fact that what is happening is wrong.
We must make sure that we do not discriminate among our friends or our classmates. We must talk to everyone in class. We must not talk to a person only because they belong to a certain religion or a caste. But we must make sure to speak to everyone equally, and we must also celebrate different festivals so that we can understand others' traditions and cultures.
Very good, both of you. I think all of us should take little steps towards a better society. Alright, students, what do you think is the main idea of the subunit that we studied till now? Is it prayer? Is it the ideal India? Or is it problems in India? Yes, the main idea is the ideal India that Tagore prays for, right? Okay. Now, moving forward, in the next 6 lines, Tagore tries to bring in the deep rooted problems in India and how they could be dealt with. Tagore aims for a future where tireless striving stretches its arms towards perfection. This means that there have been freedom fighters who struggled till their last breath for her independence, and apart from that, even today, contemporary activists fight a battle every day. Tagore prays for an India where the clear stream of reason has not lost its way. This means that he prays for an India where people possess logical thinking and reasoning, people know to differentiate the right from the wrong, uh, where people follow the path of discernment and have not lost their way into the dreary desert sand of dead habit. What does Tagore mean when he terms something as a dead habit? He means the social evils that prevailed in those times, like child marriage and sati, and something that prevails even today, that is the caste system. He described these evils as dreary desert because it is scary to even think of such evils, let alone accepting them as traditions and rituals. Here, Tagore uses a word which means you. What is that word, children? Yes, it is the word the, and it is capitalized. Why, students? Why is the capitalized, being a word at the end of the line? Because it is a reference to God. So Tagore prays to thee that he shall lead the Indian minds forward, right? And forward where? Into ever widening, meaning forever broadening one's thought and action into the heaven of freedom, meaning condition of total freedom of good thoughts, good words, and good deeds by respecting those of others. Tagore prays to the Father for an awakening among his fellow citizens. Isn't that a beautiful and a thoughtful prayer, children? All right. Now tell me, what do you think is the main idea of this subunit? Is it broadened mindset? Is it achieving the ideal India? Or is it awakening? Yes, it is how Tagore thinks the ideal India can be achieved by broadening our mindsets and by fighting battles every day towards perfection, right? So the second subunit is about achieving the ideal India with the help of God. Okay, students. So, in today's lesson, we studied a poem called Where the Mind is Without Fear, written by Tagore, where he urges God to awake his fellow beings and wants his countrymen to enjoy a life full of dignity and honor. Right? So, students, tell me, what do you think is the central idea of the poem that we studied today? Is it the freedom struggle, or is it free will and liberty, or is it prayer to the Almighty? Yes, I'm sure many of you must have guessed it. The central idea of the poem is prayer to the Almighty. Alright, students, now tell me, what are the figures of speech used in the poem? Lines like narrow domestic walls, the clear stream of reason, into the dreary desert sand of dead habit are all metaphors, because they are indirect comparisons made to very different ideas, right? The line dreary desert sand of dead habit is also an alliteration because of the repeated d sound. And the line tireless striving stretches its arm towards uh, perfection is nothing but personification and also alliteration because of the repeated S sound of striving stretches its arms. So the sir sound is repeated, so it's also an alliteration. Great. Now moving forward, children, what do you think is the rhyme scheme of the poem? Is there a rhyme scheme at all? No, right? There are no rhyming words used in the entire poem. So, children, what do you think such a poem is called? It's called a free verse. Free verse is a poetry that does not rhyme or have a regular rhythm. Alright? So, children, today we studied the poem Where Mind is Without Fear by Rabindranath Tagore, having main idea as the ideal India, and the second being achieving the ideal India, the central idea being prayer to the Almighty, and we also studied few new words and also a lot of new phrases and figures of speech. So, students, the homework for you today is to compose a poem on the theme of the struggle of the freedom fighters of India. Alright? Okay. So, thank you very much and have a good day.